Welcome back to another episode of On the Subject. I'm your host, Michael Vilardo, co-founder and CEO of Subject.com. You know where to find us. And we are so excited because we're highlighting the most innovative educators across the United States. And today we happen to be in Michigan, the beautiful state of the Mitten. And I actually went to high school here at Pioneer High School in Ann Arbor, beautiful place. And I cannot thank this incredible leader enough for his time today. Leadership in Oakland County has been incredible under his forefront. And he is a Sparty, go green, go white, Jarrad Grandy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike.
So what made you want to get into education? Why were you so passionate about helping young people become better leaders and better citizens of tomorrow?
Actually, it's a teacher of mine, Mr. Marazon. He
Shout out him.
absolutely rest in peace.
R.I.P.
He anybody that went to my high school knew he was the best teacher. Somebody might say one of the best, but he was just an awesome teacher, and he had a lot of quirky things he did, and I respected him a lot. And it was just like before class got started, and he just kind of was looking at me, and out of the blue he said, "You know what? I think you'd be a good teacher." And it was really weird, right? Because I'm 15 and I've lived a long 15 years of life, and I know pretty much all the answers at that point. And when he said it to me, I was like, I kind of gave him the look, and I'm like, oh, okay. But it just stuck with me, and it kept, like, I don't know if he ever mentioned it again. I can't remember him mentioning it again, but I do know it kind of stuck with me. And then I kind of, my 15, 16-year-old brain at the time, I kind of just used my own logic at the time to kind of get to the path of education. So he brought it up. Then from there, I said, no way I'm going to do that, because it's kind of the family business. My father was an educator. And then on my mom's side, her dad was an educator. Teachers were, my aunts, they were all educators. So it was very common. It was very common. So at that point, you don't want to go into what everybody else is doing. But here's this person over here that I greatly admired and thought him to be really just amazing at his job. And that's what actually got me started thinking about it. And there's stuff after that.
No, it's what's so beautiful about education is that one person can impact another person's life, but the butterfly effect allows for that person to impact hundreds, thousands, millions of people in their life, and it's just such a serendipitous cycle of giving. And I love that about education. That's why I'm so passionate about it. We're really passionate about innovation, and that's why you're here, and that's why we're here, is like, how do we innovate? How do we make education better? And for you, where would you like to see education 10 years from now? Like, what's your vision? What's your dream for your students, for your teachers? How do we make it better?
It's really all about relevance. So the conversation that I've had over the years and what's really defined my career as an administrator has been that regardless of zip code, race, creed, color, all the research and things, trends, just like in any other industry, there's trends that come and go and things that happen. But the one thing that stood the test of time is that regardless of all those things, we know that relevance helps all kids learn. And how do you make things relevant? We always hear the, why do I have to learn this? Where am I going to use this? That type of thing. And those types of questions. And I believe that you really have to start outside and work your way in. So I'd say that the difference in where I'd like education to go and what we're working towards across the entire county, and with some other projects that we're doing in other parts of the country as well, is really to make learning relevant and not just tie it to one set of classes. So many times we think of something, we say, okay, here's your STEM class, or here's your career and tech ed class, and it's no, the real thing should be relevance. And how do you do that? You tie it to industry problems. You tie it to real things that you need to solve. And from there, you work your way backwards. You were in Ann Arbor. I grew up in Grand Rapids, but at some point we had the same math teacher. And that math teacher was the one that said, and I pick on math as a former social studies teacher, so it's always easy.
Yeah.
But we had the same math teacher where you got your formula, you did your problems odd or even, and you rinse and repeat, right? You had that teacher, right?
Absolutely.
And it's not a knock on us as teachers, because we go from being students typically to being in charge of students. That's a normal teacher path. We have a passion. I talked a little bit about mine and how I got into it, but what we don't understand, because we're not exposed to it, is careers. And how you make things relevant is tying it to other industries, real things that are happening outside of the classroom. So wouldn't it be great if when you learn about parabolas and the equations around that, if you learned where that's actually used, what job actually uses that, right? You start there. Not, don't wait to the end. Don't teach me the theory where, and oh, by the way, you use this here. Put that on the front end, and now I have something to tie it to. That's the difference between, you know, relevance, and that's how you get kids really to grasp it. And I'll give you one last thing, and I know you probably
I
have a
love
few
this.
other
This is great.
questions. And that relevance is not application either. So we also have all had the classes where you do an egg drop or you're building a catapult. And what I tell people is, think of it like this. The exercise I always have to tell people, if you were walking into a classroom, whatever classroom you think is the appropriate grade, and you saw the kids working on, let's say, a catapult, and they're engaged, right? They're talking about the formulas, and they'll put this here, and they're building the catapult, and they're talking about it. Hands down, everybody says, that's great learning. That's great education. And I say, yes, it is. It's application, but it's not relevance. And here's why. When's the last time you drove down Woodward and you saw a catapult dealer? Right?
I don't think it's happened yet. Yeah,
Not yet.
yeah,
Not
yeah,
yet.
not yet.
And if you do, you probably hit some weird time warp, or it's very, very niche. It's a very niche business.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, all in all, keeping that in mind, I mean, that was relevant in 1292, right? That was very relevant education. You can make a good living, and there's probably many a king that would want that skill set. So it's not relevant, but it's practical. Now, metaphorically speaking, I don't say we get rid of the catapults. Of course you keep it. That's an intermediary, stage. But what you really find is that's not the end all. That's a way of learning that. But you take the geometry, the physics, the building, the text, the tactile learning, all those things with that, and you take it to the next step. All right. So that propulsion, the angles, you start showing them, actually some of this stuff and the physics behind that. This is where you use some of that in a jet engine. Right. And so now you're talking about relevance, and relevance is good for all kids, and careers are for all kids. So when we talk about, a lot of times I hear people say college and career readiness, I never say it, because college is a means to an end. It's not to denigrate college. I'm well educated, like all educators, but it's really about, if we say beginning with the end in mind, we do that except for our own personal paths. And it's not about tracking kids. It's not about saying you've now determined, in the third grade or in what insert grade that you're good in this subject. So this is what you do. But it is about giving kids meaningful experiences, about giving teachers, educators meaningful experiences, and for kids that are age appropriate, and really guide them in their path. And continuously, if we use 3 questions to guide what we do and how we design curriculum, instruction, assessment, and just overall the design of our school systems, we really get to that relevance. And that's really, what are you good at? What do you like to do? And is someone willing to pay you to do it? All right. And if that was an event, somewhere in the middle there, that's where the career is. If you get 2 out of 3 of those things, you have a job or a hobby. And we all want our kids to have careers. This is why, when they go to the greatest university and known to man, which is Michigan State.
Yeah, go green.
Go white. We know that's great. But at the end, after all those expenses, we want you to do something else. So if we begin knowing that all of our kids, we want them to be able to answer those questions, those 3 questions, and be able to have a career, we've got to start down the line. This idea of you just need to take more classes to figure it out, that might be true, but what if we were a little more intentional? And so talking about the work here in Oakland County over the last few years, especially post-COVID, we've really across the county have focused on those 3 questions, working along targets and goals, and working in partnership with our 28 local districts to find ways to help each kid get to that level of questions, because that's what's needed.
Yeah, and I love the thoughtfulness around that answer. Like, where do you get the most frustration in the education? So, like, what do you wish would change faster?
Oh, some I'm sorting through the list of things. The things I would change in education, it'd probably be two parts to it, and people may or may not be surprised. I think I wish in education that the public saw that educator to be an educator, you really actually have to have a skill. That's a very skilled thing. It's not the, it sounds cute to say if you don't know, teach, but it couldn't be far further from the truth. If you don't know, you can't teach.
Yes.
And so you're talking about really highly skilled people who have the ability to do something else, but they chose to be with your kid
Yes.
more during the day than you are.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we need to honor that part of the profession. I'd say the other part of it is also from employers. It is great that you have needs and we want to fit those needs, but you have to be able to articulate it. So many times, and in my work, I really look at my work as the intersection between education and business. And many times in my work, you will see, you hear employers that say, I need to have, I just need somebody that can show up on time. It's very low level stuff. For some employers, you show up on time, be able to communicate, make eye contact, stay off the phone. I hear these things and it's like, all right, that feels a little bit like generational wars, which I'm not a real fan of because, Socrates had a lot to say about Aristotle's generation too. But
That's well said. Yeah, I love that.
but it's like, no, you actually need more than that. We know that's not the full truth. So let's really get down to what are some real skills and competencies? What are some technical things? And we know the technical changes, right? But what are some real things that they really need to do? And if you say they need to know how to write, sweet, appreciate it. What does that mean? Because saying that to an English teacher and saying that to an executive, the writing is going to look very different, right?
Right.
And so those are things. And then the other part, I would say with education, like anything else, having constant leadership is really challenging. The national average for superintendents in a school district is less than 3 years.
Wow, there's a lot of turnover.
Yeah, and I'm being generous with that number. I don't want to be misquote because we all know there's enough false information out in public these days, but it is for sure less than 3 years. So when you consider that and you consider those changes at the top, that's going to have a systemic effect many times. And on top of that, when you add the other pressures to a job like that and to other jobs, other executive jobs, it can make it less attractive to do. And I really believe when you don't have leadership that can be there and be around year after year and chip away at the same system and keep a steadfast philosophy, you get knee-jerk, you get, very reactive systems. And so that's, I guess if that was a kind of a longer way.
Oh, I love it. You have such a incredible soothing dissertation. I love it. And have you seen technologies come into the classroom? And some were first movers, some are second movers, some innovate, some don't. Like, where have you been disappointed by technology? Where is technology? It sounds like, and I actually really like your frame of thought, like, we need to build up the profession more, we need to support teachers more. Do you think some technologies have failed to be able to innovate for the modern day student, or how have you been able to view technology?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think there are a lot of entrepreneurs that are well intended, and there's a lot of educators that are well intended. I think technology itself, for one thing, all of us had to turn on a dime to run, entire school systems due to COVID, right? I have another story about that and probably another time. I know we have other things you probably need to ask, but when we're talking about technology and its use in the classroom, I think many times we get into the bells and whistles instead of the intent. Mm-hmm. Sometimes less is more. So
Yes.
if the interface is complicated, I'm not really going to want to use it. If the content seems either dated or this seems some version of a worksheet, but yet it's on a computer screen, you run into those types of things. Like, that's not exactly what you need. And then sometimes you'll find these gems that really do hit the nail on the head. They hit the relevance. They hit the appropriate type of UX, right? They hit the price points, and everybody needs to make money. We all got to eat. So it's not, we're not trying to, but it has to be the price point. And then sometimes some models are also not as flexible. So in working with some vendors in the past, they're like, they'll show you the video on the website. They'll give you a sneak peek at, here's the 5 lessons and how about you buy it? And I'm like, nah, if we're going to make this investment, there's multiple people I need to see, and they need to see it, and you need to give them access. And for me, I can't speak for everyone all the time, but if I say I'm going to give it to these 5 team members, that's what we're going to do. And we're not trying to, teach an entire system on a freebie, but you do need to stress test the technology. So one of the things I find a lot of times with vendors, they're not willing to do the stress test, and that's okay. Then you weren't meant to be in front of my kids.
I love the passion. I love the focus. What would you say if you were to speak to your 22 or 23-year-old self and getting into education? Like, what would be the best advice for a young educator and how they could be able to impact people the most positively and learn along the way?
That's a good one. Let me think. I think if I were to go back in time at 22, 23, so at that point, I definitely knew I was teaching. I was in my first year of teaching. I'd tell myself, it gets better. It gets better, and you're going to learn a whole lot. And what you think you know now, you're really going to understand later. So when I got out of college, I knew I wanted to teach, and I knew that was, I've gone through enough to student teaching, all those things to know this is what I want to do. This is the skill I wanted to continue to hone in the career path I wanted to follow. And for my own path, that like a lot of educators, at one point I got disillusioned because I felt at that point in time, when I got into teaching in the early 2000s, actually 2000, it was much less, your job security was much less based on your performance. And I hated that. And not that I thought that I was as good as Mr. Marizon. I never was, right? He's amazing. But that got to me. And so when budget cuts happened and, my first 7 years as a teacher, I was pink slipped 5 times. Nothing to do with performance. Everything had to do with economics. And I got called back and I switched districts at one point and those types of things. So, but you get to a certain point, you're like, I did this to help, but this is a lot. People don't know, like, my job isn't done at 2:10. If you really care about it, if you really care about it, you're putting in more hours, and you don't complain about the hours.
Yeah, yep.
But you also say, like, look, come April, May every year, this isn't a cool feeling, right? And so I would tell myself, because at that point, at 23, I wouldn't know it. It's gonna feel worse in some ways, but it will get better. And if you stay the course, you can really help a lot of other people help kids. And your path, believe it or not, 23-year-old Jarrad, you're eventually going to be an administrator, which there's no way at 23, because I had all the answers too. Not like the genius I was at 15. At 23, I definitely had all the answers. So, yeah, I guess that's what I would tell myself.
That's amazing, and I really appreciate you spending time with us today. I always love to have this as, as a tie in the bow at the end of the great discussion is, when you think about where you see yourself in 20 years and looking back on this, crazy time going through COVID and all the, the tumultuous experiences and helping so many people, what would you be most proud of and why?
Professionally, it would be the staff that I help coach, the staff that many of who I still keep in contact with today, and we don't work together anymore or anything like that, but they reach out at times and I'm able to help, or they reach out for advice. I'd say I'm proud of that. I'm proud of how much I've learned from them, because coaching is it's a two-way engagement. And then I can point to particular projects along the way, but it's the people. The projects are really cool, and those, I won't say they come and go, but if you're good enough at what you do, you can do that. You can have reached that level of excellence more than once. So it's been quite a few projects that I'd be particularly proud of, but it's the coaching, it's the people, the relationships.
It's everything. It's all for the people. It's all for the students, all for the teachers. And It's really helping society, and we're forever indebted to everything you've done so far and what's ahead of you. And we really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with our listeners. And that was another incredible episode of On the Subject. You know where to find us on YouTube and Spotify. Please click subscribe. Anywhere to find you on social that we want to tell the listeners?
Sure. Best way is to hit me up on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, you heard it here first. Thank you so much, everyone. And again, continue to listen to the most innovative educators throughout the United States. We're so happy to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.